Hello! Alright, we are going to be jumping into the walk cycle tutorial today. Alright, so be prepared for another long, drawn-out, boring video of this voice talking at you through the power of the internet. Okay, so we're inside After Effects, right, and I have made a new project, and I am just going to import my character. Alright, skinny character. I'm just using the skinny character because I resonate with it on a personal, spiritual level. When I import as, I want to make sure that I set it to composition retain layer sizes. Very important that I do that. Okay, and it makes a composition for me. Okay, in my project panel over here, and I can double click that, and here my little character is. Okay, now, as we, most of us discussed in class, right, we found that more and more issues would crop up if we started animating inside of this pre-made composition for us, okay? Because I have an older version of After Effects, it might not be as prominent or as big an issue, but let's assume that it will. So, to circumvent those issues, we are going to double-click on the composition so that it opens up in our timeline. I'm going to select all my layers, right? Simply click and drag to select them. Control C or Command C for your Mac users out there. Then I'm going to click on this little button over here, create new composition. Alternatively, you can hit Control or Command N. N for NATO, for new, okay? And that brings up my new composition settings. And I'm going to label this root animation. Okay. And I hit Enter, and it makes it for me. Now, if I want to make sure that I've got the correct settings, I didn't mean to actually hit Enter there. I'm going to hit Command or Control K for the KKK, and it's going to bring up my composition settings again. And I'm just going to make sure that my frame rate is set to 25, 1920 by 1080 square pixels. I do not need this to be a 2-minute video. Alright, 5 seconds. 5 seconds max, and we're going to say OK. Cool. Then I'm going to click into the timeline area over here, and I'm going to hit Control or Command V. V for very, very easy, and it's going to paste those layers for me. Alright, now, we remember that we don't want to begin by simply parenting our objects, okay? We also found through our trials and errors that sometimes broke the issues as well. I'm going to click on my source name here just so that I can see the name rather than the full file name. Alright, and I'm going to solo each of my layers by clicking in the little solo box over here. Right, you see I've turned this little white dot on. This means that it only shows for the arm. I'm going to select my pan behind tool, shortcut for this is Y, and I'm going to shift my anchor point up to where the shoulder would connect with the torso. Alright, it makes sense. The arm does not connect at the elbow to our torso, it connects at the shoulder. Alright, for the leg, I'm going to solo my top leg, and I'm going to shift my anchor point to where the thigh would connect to the torso. My face, I might find that I want to add a little bit of animation later. If we sort of unsolo the face and we take a look here, we can assume that this area, kind of over here, is actually the center of the face, okay, just because of the perspective that we're seeing it. So I'm going to shift it up a little bit. The torso itself, I'm going to solo. Now, when we bend in the torso, or when we rotate, we don't bend at the exact middle, alright? This kind of looks like maybe 3 or 4 ribs above where your rib cage would end. We bend in the stomach slash sort of like by the hip area, okay, and that would be somewhere around here. So I'm just going to shift my anchor point there. Alright, and then my leg at the bottom, again shifting the anchor point to the top of the thigh, and my arm shifting the anchor point to the shoulder. Alright, it's very important that we do this step first, because once we start animating the position of these layers, we will not be able to easily change the anchor point later, and changing the anchor point would affect our entire animation. Alright, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be focusing on the legs. Alright, we're going to be blocking things out step by step. Monday class, we looked at a different method, alright, but that was maybe a little bit too complex, so we're going to tone it down a little bit for now. It just leads to a lot more key work, but it doesn't rely as heavily on expressions. Okay, so I'm going to hide my arms because we're not going to be looking at those just yet. And I am going to lock them so that I can't interact with them, and I'm going to click on my little toggle switches and modes so that I can see my little man. Right, we remember this little dude popping his head over the wall. I'm going to click on the little man so that he hides, and then I'll click his button over here to make those layers shy. In fact, I can do the same for the face because I don't need to see the face at the moment. And this just means I have more real estate in my timeline over here to work with. Okay, now before we start animating, there's a couple of things we need to do to finish prepping this character, and the very first thing should be recognizing where the floor is. Okay, so under view we have the option to show rulers, otherwise it is Control or Command R. Brings up our little rulers, and if I hover over the ruler you'll see I get a double-headed arrow. Now I can click and drag that down and I'll get a little blue line to mark where the floor is. And I'm going to drag these rulers down to where my back leg and my front leg are touching. And this way I know exactly where they are on the floor. Alright, then under view I am going to lock my guides. Alright, view, scrolling down, lock guides. This means that I can't interact with these. Alright, so I can't accidentally move my floor later down the line. The next thing that I want to do is introduce my puppet pins to my limbs. Alright, so I've soloed my top leg. I'm going to select my puppet pin tool, and I'm going to add a pin roughly where, let me just hide the mesh, roughly where the anchor point is, right? So that's kind of the hip where it joins. Then I'm going to add it to where my knee would be, one to the ankle, and then one to the toes. Alright, and this will allow us to introduce a little bit of wiggle movement going on there. Okay, now we want to test. For those of you who didn't have to go through this mundane process, I think it was only my second Thursday and then my Friday classes, we need to do this just to make sure that we don't lose faith in our animation later down the line. I'm going to select my layer, and I'm going to hit U for uniform. Alright, it's going to then reveal the keys that I've just made for the puppet pin. I'm also going to then click on my layer and hold Shift, and I'm going to press the button R for rabbit. And that will bring up my rotation. Now I don't want to make a key for the rotation. I just want to make sure, first of all, that I can still rotate this leg even though I've made a mesh on it. Okay, if this is broken at this stage, then you'll see that your pins are not following along. So if I were to show the mesh for the character and then I rotate, right, my mesh is hidden, that's fine, but the fact of the matter is my leg currently isn't bending or sort of snapping in any weird way. The next thing that I want to do after I've seen that it will bend correctly is I want to just quickly bend the knee. Alright, all the low-key memes intended. After I've bent the knee, I want to then shift my rotation again just to make sure that that's not breaking in any way. My leg currently is not. If it is, then what you need to do is select all your keys, delete them, okay? Select this little thing that says puppet, delete that, and then re-puppet everything, okay? Which is why we do this test now, to make sure that we don't start animating only to find out that it's broken. We're going to do the same thing on our back leg. Pin on the thigh, let me hide my mesh so I can see what I'm working on. Pin on the knee, pin on the ankle, and pin on the toes. Okay, hit U to show all of those keys. I can simply select one of the keys for the little yellow dots to appear again. Now notice that I still have my puppet pin tool selected and I can interact with these pins, but this is a bit of a gamble, especially if you're working on a trackpad, because we could accidentally add another pin and that's going to drastically change what our animation looks like. So I'm going to jump over to my selection tool, which still allows me to move the pins. Alright, selecting my layer, Shift and R for rabbit, and I'm going to rotate again and make sure that my mesh is not breaking. So currently, all is well. Okay, now, the next thing that I need to do is parent these legs to my torso. I do that with this little snail icon. It's called the pick whip. Alright, no one's going to take you seriously if you call the pick whip the snail icon. So we're going to click on the pick whip, drag it over the torso and let go. Notice that this now says under parent for torso. It is listing for torso as the layer's parent. I'll do the same to my top leg. Now I need to do the same thing. I need to test that my parenting has not broken it. So I'm going to bend both of my knees quickly. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that when I rotate these legs, they don't break. Alright, so that's looking fine for now. I'm happy with that. Okay, like I said, if they are breaking, then we need to delete the puppet effect off of the layer and restart. So rather get that done now than later. Cool. So, the next thing that I'd like to do is drag myself out to 1 second on the timeline. Select my keyframes simply by clicking and dragging in the timeline. You'll notice that they're blue now, and I'm going to drag them forward to the 1 second, and I'll make sure that the same thing happens over here. Okay, the reason why I do this is because, as we mentioned with our expressions, if I were to shift these keys up or down, I want to be able to still see them in space. I don't want them moving beyond my 0 on the timeline. Okay. So now we can actually begin animating, but before I do that, I'm going to hit Control or Command S just to quickly save, and now we can continue. Now, I, being the idiot that I am, forgot the little paper that I gave you guys at work, but this kind of still acts in the same way. The breakdowns are exactly the same. Frame 1 is our contact. Frame 2 is where we're sort of leaning forward. Sorry, frame 4, not frame 2. Frame 7 is our passing frame. Frame 10 is our up, and that's sort of getting ready to come into the sort of landing into the step, and then frame 13 is our next contact frame. Alright, so this is exactly the same from what I remember from the ones that I gave you, so you should still be able to follow along. Okay, now the first thing that I need to do is just block out this frame 1. So if I take a look at this, our legs are slightly parted, alright, we're sort of mid-stride, but both feet are still touching the floor. Okay, so if I were to do that, I would start with my top leg. I would make a keyframe for my rotation as well, because we will be adding rotation, and I am going to bend this leg sort of backwards a little bit, and then our bottom leg I will bend forwards. Now, you'll notice that they're no longer, well, this leg at least is no longer touching the ground, and that's okay, because obviously our torso bobs up and down as we walk, yes? So, it doesn't matter if they're not touching the ground, because we are still going to animate our torso, and when the torso moves, the legs move, because we've parented them to it. So for now, I just want to get my legs into the correct position. And if I think about it, when I'm mid-stride, we never want straight knees, because that's a very painful way to walk. For those of you who've ever had like a dog, I specifically remember like every example of this happening to me involving a Labrador, like running straight into my leg and snapping my knee backwards, and just absolutely flooring me with pain. So I want to add a little bit of a bend to my knees. Okay. And that's already making it look a lot more realistic. And if I were to think about it, my toes would also be a little bit more bent in both of these examples, because our foot is bending back so that our heel can hit the ground. Okay, so we've got the legs in the right position. Now we can select the torso, hit P for position, and we can make a keyframe. Alright, and what we can do then is we can simply select the torso and move it down so that our heel is touching and our toe is touching the lines. Cool, so we are still touching the floor, and things are looking pretty dope at the moment. Okay, he's got spaghetti legs, but that's okay. We can always go back and refine them later. Now, when we count out our frames, we're on frame 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0 at the moment. So if we were to take a look at our cycle, we are technically on frame 1. So I could make this a lot easier for everyone if I simply shift myself up by 1 frame, select and drag all my keyframes up to frame 1. So now we're all on the exact same page. Yes? Great stuff. I'm going to hit B for beginning so that I cut my timeline here and I know that I'm not using this dead space. Okay, now my next pose happens on frame 4. Okay, and that is where all of the weight has been sort of transferred, or is in the process of being transferred onto the front leg. Okay, and our back leg is starting to come off the ground. Now if I take a look, I've accidentally swapped my legs around, so what I'm going to do is just quickly rectify that. So this would actually be about here, and this would be back here. Alright, I apologize for the inconvenience, but there we go. Now we are on the same page. Okay, so my leg is mimicking exactly what is happening here. Our top leg is in the front and our back leg is at the back. Great. Now we need to transfer the weight onto this foot. Okay, so I'm going to use this as my guide. I'm going to hit page down 3 times, 1, 2, 3, to take me to the 4th frame. If you're on a Mac, you're going to hold down Command and hit your right arrow key 3 times. I don't care how you get there as long as you do. 0, 1, 0, 4, this is where our next position is. Alright, so if I take a look at this, this leg is bent, our shin is straight, and our foot is on the ground. So let's do it. Alright, our leg is bent, our foot is on the ground, and our shin is fairly straight. Okay, so roughly like so. And again, remember, whatever we're doing right now, we are blocking. We will always come back later to refine. Okay, so if I've broken my volume a little bit, I can fix that later. Now, something that we need to remember to do is to click on this little gray diamond over here. Alright, add or remove keyframe at current time. I just want to add what I call a dead rotation frame, right? It's dead because it's not actually changing anything, but what it is doing is it's telling the program not to change anything at this time. Okay, then if I take a look at my back leg, our thigh is kind of straight down, our shin then extends backwards, our foot is higher off the ground, and our toes are touching. Okay, so I could maybe bring this forward, bring this a little bit higher like so. Make sure that that's touching the ground. Don't accidentally move the entire layer, and we could do that. Now, something that we could also do later down the line, just to introduce a little bit of visual interest here, is actually sort of either shift the position of our hip, alright, or we could shift the position of the layer just to introduce a bit of a gap going on so we can see more distinguishing features. But for now, we'll leave it as such. And I'm also going to add a dead keyframe for the rotation here by clicking on what was the little gray empty diamond, and when I click on it, it turns blue. Okay, our torso position is exactly the same, so I'm just going to make another dead keyframe there for now, and we can come back and adjust it later. Now, frame 7, we are in the passing phase. Okay, what happens here is all the weight is on our front leg or our top leg, alright, and our back leg is busy passing behind it. Alrighty, so drag myself out to 0107, and I am going to select my top leg, and I am going to shift my keys so that they are underneath the torso and they are holding the entire weight. Now, I can also add sort of a bit of rotation. If I brought this back to 0, for example, alright, that's just going to help my leg retain its scale when I do this. Okay, so it's going to help with the positioning. Let's lift that up a little bit. It's still touching the floor. Still got a bend in the knee, right? We never walk with very sort of straight legs unless you're a bit of a fascist. Okay, so that's our top leg for now. Take a look at my back leg. I can introduce a little bit more rotation. Okay, just so that there's less work or strain on our keys. Our knee is slightly more forward, and then we are going to bring the foot and sort of heel up. Alright, so we're in a fairly believable passing position at the moment. Okay, still we haven't changed anything with our torso, and that's going to start being a little unbelievable. But like I said, we are going to come back to it. In class, we used the torso as the guide. We had it sort of moving up and down, but in this exercise we're going to be using the legs as our guide, just to show that you can do it either way. Alright, then we've just done 7, so we're on 10. This is kind of our highest up pose, alright, and this is where our back leg is distributing the weight and our body is falling forward, getting ready to land in our next contact pose. So drag myself out to 0, 1, 10. Cool. I'll make a dead keyframe for my torso, and let's change up the rotation slightly, and then we can add a bit more of a bend to the knee, a bend to the toes, and our heel is still on the ground. Alright, but if that's not necessarily working for my character at the moment, I can do this for now, and that's still going to be fairly believable. Okay, then on our back leg we can use the rotation to bring it forward. Okay, and I can just select both of these, drag them forward, which sort of makes it look very strange, but it's going to allow me just to get them into the right position for now. Accidentally clicked off of it there, and that's looking fairly interesting. Alright, oops, nope, we're not playing Dauntless yet. Okay, so in this example it's sort of not as big a step, but we are exaggerating. Alright, and we could have our toe facing down slightly like so. Okay, then our next frame is on 13, and 13 is our next contact phase. 2, 3, so 0, 1, 13. Okay, now what I want to do is have this leg touching the ground, so I need to straighten it a little bit. Okay, and we'll drag it out, make sure that it's touching the correct ground. I think we should add a little bit more of a rotation. If I sort of look back on frame 1, the rotation on my front leg was -27. Alright, so let's keep it the same for this one. -27, and then we can adjust these keyframes to match. Okay. So that's looking fairly cool, and then the rotation at the very beginning on our back leg was set to +31. So on frame 13 we can set the rotation on our top leg to 31, and we can then adjust the keyframes as necessary, or the puppet pins as necessary. Alright, and this gives us our next contact pose. Okay, so that's looking fairly cool. If I sort of scrub through that, that's looking fairly decent actually. Alright, there's a bit of clipping through the floor there that we'll need to fix in a little bit, but for now, let's take a look at what's cracking in terms of the torso movement now. So, if I were to look here, we can see that we've got an oscillation taking place. Alright, so our contact pose is kind of our sort of general height, then we dip into our step, so we go a bit lower. The passing pose, we're a little bit higher, but not as high as on frame 10, which is just before we hit the ground, and then contact we are at the same height here again. So, on my torso, right, let me just make a dead position frame at the end, and that way we've got something to work with for all of them. We're going to leave this exactly the same because this is our generic height. Alright, then on this frame, we are sinking into our step. So we need to bring the torso down a little bit. And I could move the actual torso like so. Okay, I could select it, hold shift, and use my arrow keys to move it, which might work at the moment. Or I could use this number over here, the one on the right, for position, and drag it up and down. Okay, however you do it, let's just shift it just a little bit. And then we are going to adjust our keys so that, let's not have that happen. Adjust our keys so that they're still touching the ground. Alright, and we can introduce a little bit more bend to the knee. Okay, our back leg we can bring up slightly like so. That's looking fairly cool. Let's not accidentally move the whole layer. Alright, so we have sunk into our lowest point here. Okay, then our passing point. This is only slightly higher than this key. So this key is only slightly higher than this one. I'm going to select it. Control or Command C for cat to copy it. Control or Command V for man, I keep wanting to say something else, but I'm not going to say that on video. To paste it, and then we are just going to zoom in, and we'll raise it ever so slightly, maybe between the 2 points. Okay, and then again, we will adjust the position of the feet just so that they make a little bit more sense in relation to the ground. Okay, so I can do that, and I can sort of do this a little bit more, and there we go. Okay, then this position over here is our up position. Alright, frame 10, this is where we are highest off the ground. This is where this leg is the straightest, and we're sort of coming onto our toes as well. So if I were to look at my position, shift up arrow once to raise me off the ground. In fact, I could go a little bit higher even if I wanted to exaggerate it, and then just make sure that my foot is still touching the ground. Okay. And then the cool thing is, because we did the exact same thing, we are in the same contact pose here, I don't need to worry about changing this because it is the same as this one over here. Okay, if it were different, I could always just select my first one, Control or Command C to copy it, V to paste it on the end. Alright, so now if I take a look at it and sort of, I'll hit N to end my timeline. If I run through, okay, we've got a little bit of a bouncy walk going on at the moment. Okay, cool. So what we have just completed is the first step, right? We do still need to continue to frame 25 in order to get to a full walk cycle. Alright, so we're on frame 13 at the moment. The very next frame that we need to be on is frame 16, and that's where we sink into that step and we start lifting the pressure off of our back leg, right? Back leg meaning the leg that is currently at the back. So I'm going to shift myself to frame 16. Now I know, okay, so just bear with me, right? It's going to make sense. This frame 1 for our torso position, is the same as frame 13, correct? Because they are the exact same pose, but our legs have been swapped around. It then stands to reason that if I go to frame 16, that our second frame for position will be the same here. So instead of trying to line it up, I'm just simply going to copy paste it. Alright, in fact, you can just make your lives a lot easier by making sure that you're sitting on top of our end frame. Select all of them, Control C, Control V. Alright, what you've essentially done is you just copy pasted that motion. And look, it ends on the second, which is essentially frame 25. Okay, and now our torso is in the correct place, and we can use that to guide our next couple of steps. Okay, so frame 16, we're sinking into our step, so we could bring our rotation forward just a little bit, and then we can adjust the position of these keys so that that makes sense. Let's shift this rotation slightly further back, and then we can make sure we're still only touching the ground. Now I see I've made a mistake. With this leg over here, it has to be touching that line. Okay, so that just means raising the keyframes up a little bit. Okay, bending the knee a little bit more. Okay, so that's looking pretty cool. Then on frame 19, we're in our passing frame again. Alright, so if I focus on my bottom leg for now, bring my rotation to 0. Okay, so it's exactly in the middle. Shift my keyframes up so that they're in the correct place, like so. Add the correct bend in the knee, so it actually looks like we've sort of taken this step. Alright, try and get the pins to work with me as best as possible. Then on my top leg, we can bring this position over here. Yeah. And then we can play with our keyframes again so that this is much higher off the ground. I'm actually not happy with the position of the back leg, so I'm just going to straighten. There we go. That was the issue. We were dipping a little bit too much into that step, but that's looking pretty dope. Alright, and I use that word unironically. Okay, so now we've got that, and we're going to drag out to frame 22. Frame 22 is our highest pose, and this is where our top leg has now sort of passed and is getting ready to make contact, and our back leg is at its sort of straightest. Okay, so what I'm going to do is focus on my back leg for now. I'll add a little bit of rotation. Okay, so maybe about that much, and then I'll just make sure that I'm still touching the ground, right, so that we're not just Casper the floating ghost here. Front leg, we'll add a little bit more rotation, and we can begin to straighten it out like so. Maybe that was a little too much for sure. So we want to keep that bend in the knee, keep accidentally missing these points. There we go, and maybe we don't want as high a kick, but we'll see what it looks like. It could look interesting to have that much bend in the knee. Okay, and then our very last pose. Now, because this pose at the end, if we take a look here, frame 1, frame 25, tell me what the difference is. There is none. There is no difference. So, I can make my life very easy simply by copying the keys on my top leg from the beginning, Control C, Control V, and pasting them on the end. Right? And what I have done is I have just saved myself all that little animation. And I'm going to double click away, just make sure that I don't have anything else selected, and I'll do the exact same thing on the back leg. Control C, Control V. Clicking away, and now if I play through that, that's a fairly decent walk cycle. So far at least. We still need to add our arms. Okay, so there we go. We've got our steps. Now you'll notice of course that we are losing a little bit of volume, especially here in our feet. Okay, and the way that we can fix this is by selecting our toes, and for whatever reason all of our damn pins are down here, and I still haven't figured out why this happens, right? So if someone knows, if someone can figure it out, let me know so that I don't feel like such an idiot all the time. But the way that we're going to fix this is I'm just going to make sure that I select the key for my toes, which should be this one over here. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in over here, and using my, wrong tool, under the pen tool, using my convert vertex tool, I'm going to click and add some curves on these points. Alright, and this is going to help me, hopefully, break these horrible sessions of like weird volume loss that is taking place. Okay, now this is obviously a little bit more difficult because we don't have the exact, like, we can't see what's happening, so I'm just gonna have to go back and make sure that I haven't actually just made it worse. So if I take a look here, it seems to, nope, still losing a lot of volume. Let's see if I can figure out where we are at the moment. I think this needs to go that way, but we have this out here. And I'm actually just going to pull all the curves away from the body. Maybe that'll help. Like so. Pulling it away from the body, fighting with this. Right, so this is, it is usually a bit of a mission, alright, and it's not 100% necessary. Like, my walk cycle isn't going to fail completely without it, but I am a perfectionist and I expect a lot of myself. so I will try and get it right as best I can, and if you are the same as me, then yeah, just keep pushing until you're happy with it. So let's see, that should have helped a little bit, right? We're still losing a bit of volume, but for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to spend too much time in the video trying to fix it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is on the 2-second mark, I'm going to hit N to end my timeline, and now if I hit spacebar, I have a lovely little walk cycle going on. Alright, but there's still a couple of things that I could do to really help make this shine a little bit more. Okay, so the first thing that I can do, selecting my top leg, I am going to hit P to Shift and P to bring up my position, and I'm going to make a dead keyframe for it. And I'm going to take a look at my leg over here. Now I need to be careful to not ruin what I've done so far, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scrub to the points that we blocked out, right, our main points. So I think what I'm going to focus on is, rather than every single frame, I'm going to focus on 1, 7, and 13. Alright, so contact, passing, contact, and then we'll do passing and contact again in a little bit. So on frame 1, we've got a keyframe for position. On frame 7, we're going to make a keyframe for position, and then on frame 13, we'll make another keyframe for position. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to look at my legs and I'm going to make some adjustments. Now, my leg is currently pushed forward at the moment, so I could shift it. I'm going to use hold down shift and my arrow keys to move it. What's happening here, if I try and move it with my mouse, is you'll notice that it's snapping down a little bit. And the reason why that's happening is currently under view, snap to guides is on, and this little point is snapping to this ruler. So I'm just going to turn off snap to guides by clicking on it, and now I can drag this forward a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to introduce a curve like so, but maybe it would go this way. Let's see. Okay, now on frame 7, this is going to be halfway through the torso. Right, I think down is actually the correct position. Let's see. Okay, so I'll move that to the beginning of the torso, and then our little frame over here, our leg is at the back, and so we will have the point be at the back, and this just introduces a little bit more visual interest. Alrighty, now what I'm going to do is on frame 19, which is our next contact pose, I am just going to copy paste the middle position key because it's exactly the same. Just making sure that I go back using my convert vertex tool to keep my rotation or my arcs in the same direction. Alright, so I'll copy paste that, and then because it's exactly the same, frame 1 position at the end, and again just make sure that's happened over there. Alright, that's looking a little bit cooler. Right, we've got a swag little step going on, and I'm going to do the same on the back leg, right, because what we do to one, it makes sense to do on the other. So I'm going to select the back leg, shift P for position, and I'm going to make a couple of dead frames. I can use my top leg as a guide for that. There, and there, and there, and there. Alright, now we do the exact same thing. So if I take a look over here, my back leg is stretched backwards. So let's drag it backwards a little bit. Not too far. We don't want to break the illusion that this leg is like flopping through space, but that's kind of working. Then at this passing point, let's bring it sort of to the middle of the torso. Alright, so just not so far forward. And then here, this makes sense. It's at the front of the torso. That's looking great. And then I'm just going to copy that, my middle frame to my middle frame, and I'll copy the first frame to the end frame, and then I can go and add my my curves with my convert vertex tool, because life is grand and easy, and we want to create a pleasing sort of arc following animation. Okay, so we'll do that and that. We'll drag this one down, and we'll just make sure that everything is behaving as best as we can make it. Okay, I can always just quickly shift this keyframe down if I'm struggling to get at that handle, and I must just make sure to move it back again. And I can just do that with my selection tool, like so. Okay, so now if I play through, we've got a nice looking little bob going on. So that's looking absolutely great. I've done a lot of work, and this would be the perfect opportunity for SCOM or your computer to just dick you over. So I'm going to quickly save. And in fact, it would be a good idea to hit Control or Command Shift S, and we're just going to make a second save file, just in case something crashes and it corrupts, we don't lose everything. Alright, so I think we're pretty done with our legs at the moment. We could probably select all of these keyframes and hit F9, right, or simply right click keyframe assist easy ease, because adding easing will always help space things out a little bit, but you'll notice that we're getting a bit of lag on the end there. Okay, and we are going to fix that with our loop expression in a moment. But for now, I kind of feel as though that's looking pretty dope at the moment. Okay, so I am going to then collapse my legs. Alright, collapse the layers for the legs. We don't need to see those. We've got our torsos made. Sorry, my caps lock is accidentally on there. And now I can click on my little blue man over here to unshy everything that I hid earlier, and I'm going to bring out my arms, because that is the next step. Right, I'm just going to unshy those. I can shy my legs because I don't need to see the layers. I don't have to turn them off because I can still see them as reference in my little animation here. Okay, but for now I'm going to unlock these layers, arm top solo, and I need to do the same test that we did earlier. Alright, so I'm going to add my puppet pin to the shoulder, to the elbow, kind of maybe over there, and then to the hand. Now we don't need 4 for the arm. I think I'm just going to add it to the wrist, and that will work for me just fine. Alternatively, maybe in the middle of the hand. That's working, so we'll just leave it there. Alrighty. Then I'm going to hit U to reveal my layers, add a bend in the elbow, select the layer, Shift R to bring up rotation, and rotate it to make sure that it's working. Alright, it is, so that is great. I'll make a dead rotation frame, unsolo it, solo my bottom arm, and we'll do the same thing. Alright, pin, pin, and pin, bend the arm, hit U to reveal those keyframes, Shift R to reveal rotation, rotate it, make sure that it's working. It is great stuff. Then, what I need to do next is to parent my arm to my torso, right? Because again, our torso drives the vertical and horizontal direction of the arm. Okay, and after I've made that parenting, I then again need to just test and make sure that my rotation is working. It is. Great stuff. How about this arm over here? So if I sort of select this and I bend it and I rotate it, great, it's working. Remember to make a dead keyframe for the rotation on my back arm. Alright, so now we can still use, if I sort of play this, we've got a sort of very tired dude walking over here. So we can also use our breakdown to take a look at where our arms need to be. Okay, but we also kind of understand that the arms do the opposite of the legs. So when our one leg is all the way forward, the arm on the same side of the body is all the way back. Alright, so I think the easiest way to key this out would actually be to start on frame 4. And then we could work back to frame 1 and forward to frame 7. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So let's go to frame 4. And I'm just going to make a couple of keyframes here by clicking on all these little gray diamonds. Alright, those are just going to make little keyframes for me. And now I can introduce some animation to these. So if I take a look at this arm in relation to this leg, right? So it's obviously going to be bent, right? Maybe like so. And rotation-wise, it's going to be a lot further back. Okay. We could probably bend this a little bit more. Maybe bring this down. I'm just going to swap over to my selection tool so I don't accidentally add any more puppet pins. We really don't want any more of those. There we go. And then on our back arm, now this obviously gets a little bit tricky because the torso is in the way, but I can hide it for now. It's a little creepy looking, but so let it be. We'll introduce a bit of a bend and then rotate it. Maybe minus 50 if I bring the torso back. That's looking pretty cool. Okay, and obviously depending on the you know what we can do to make this easier is we can actually just change the opacity of the torso. So I'm going to select my torso, hit T to bring up my opacity. I'm not going to make a keyframe, but I am just going to drag this down to about 50 so that I can see through it. And that way I can still see my arm at the back. And then I'll hit P just to bring up my position frames again to help guide me. Alright, so I can see that I have shifted this a little bit too much. There we go. Actually trying not to change the position of the shoulder too much. We'll just change the relation of the arm like so. Okay. Now we're going to go back to frame 1, and if we take a look at frame 1, our arms are sort of, they're just not as extreme as what we've just made them. Right, so that's really the biggest difference. So what I can do is I'm just going to select the keyframes from frame 4, Control C, Control V to paste. Now watch, I've just clicked away, right? It's deselected the puppet pins, but it still has my rotation pin selected. So if I were to then select this, okay, it didn't happen this time, which is great. Sometimes what can happen is that you can then try and copy other keys and it will simply duplicate the layers. Alright, so we need to double click away just so that we don't still have a keyframe selected. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to change this to be a little bit more subtle. Minus 25. We'll bring this down a little bit. Bring this elbow a little bit forward. This is positive 25, so let's make it about 16, 19. Alright, and we'll just have it not be as much. Alright, so that's looking pretty cool. Then passing pose. Now in the passing pose, what we have is our top arm is sort of just a couple of frames or sort of just a couple of degrees away from the body. Our back arm is roughly still pointing forward, but just not as much. So we can bring this over here, bring this down. Our back arm we can rotate in a little bit. Do this. I did lose a lot of my volume there, but that's looking okay so far. Bring this in a little bit like so. And we're obviously going to come back and tweak it, but for now we kind of just want to get the general idea. Frame 10 is pretty much where the arms are opposite one another, right? So that's about there and thereabouts, seems to be. Sort of drag that down, drag this one down, still keeping a little bit of a bend there, like so. And then frame 13 is our next contact phase. So what we can do is just copy paste the initial keys from frame 1, but change the rotation so that the correct arm is facing forwards and then the correct arm is backwards. Alright, and we are obviously going to then change the position of these arms so that the back arm is a little bit more visible. Okay, now, so that's kind of working. Next one, we're sinking into our step on frame 16, right? So our front arm is now the most forward. So we can sort of just push the rotation a little bit more, really selling that like cartoony spaghetti noodle arm kind of vibe. I myself have spaghetti noodle arms, so I resonate quite well with it. Okay, so we'll do that. Gonna need a bit of tweaking later, but for now, we'll just carry on. Alright, so that's frame 16. Frame 19, we want to bring them slightly closer in, so we'll just bring the rotation back a little bit, make the bend not as intense. This one, same thing, like so. Maybe this back arm, perhaps we could push out a little bit more. Then on frame 22, again, that's kind of where they are opposite one another, pretty much directly. So if we were smart, we could find the frame where they were opposite one another, sort of over here. So frame 22 is the same as frame 10, so I'm just going to go back to frame 10, and I will copy these keys, move out to frame 22, paste them there, and then frame 10 again, I can copy these keys, and frame 22, paste them there. Alright, that just saves me like a little bit of work. And then, of course, because frame 1 and frame 25 are exactly the same, I can simply copy-paste the very first keyframes. Alright, so this is kind of working. I'm going to select my torso, bring the opacity back up just so I can see what's cracking. There's a bit of a pop happening, which I'm not too happy with. And the pop sort of happens over here, so I think I pushed this too far. But for now, what might also help is just rolling the position of the shoulder a little bit. So, selecting my top arm, I'm actually going to hide my back arm for now, just so that that's not confusing me. I'm going to select my top arm, Shift P to bring up the position, and I'll make a keyframe. Alright. Now, let's just bring the position back up for that. This is where I could unshy my leg, for example, and just hit P so that I can see the position of that leg, and I can then make the same blocking for the position of my arm, because even though they're going to be opposite one another, it makes sense that they would be driven in the same sort of speed, at least for our blocking phase at the moment. All right, we can always offset them a little bit later. So if we take a look at our arm at the moment, it is currently a little bit back, so I'm actually going to leave it where it is, because on our next frame, no, we actually do need to drag it back just a little bit. Okay. Our next frame, this is actually kind of working. Perhaps we could shift it a little bit forward. We don't want too much movement in the arms. We don't want to break the idea that it is like actually attached to this torso. But the cool thing is that by adding this little position shift, we might be able to sell the idea of like a nice rolling shoulder, for example. Alright, so that's looking pretty cool. That adds quite a bit of character to it. I can then add, of course, just grab my convert vertex tool and add the necessary curves. Okay, I'm just going to shift this down out the way so that I can access it. Playing with these curves can be a bit of a nightmare, but at the end of the day, it's really worth it, and I highly recommend just biting the bullet, taking the time necessary to get it looking right. Okay, so that's looking pretty dope. Alright, nice little swing on the arms. And then I need to do the same thing on my back arm. So I'm actually going to hide my torso, bring my back arm back into visibility, Shift P to bring up the position, and I can use, again, just the leg position. Just using the top leg position, just so I can block out the position on this. And over there. Okay, and we don't really need to see the torso, but it might help, I guess. So what I'm going to do is just reshine my leg layers so that I don't see those. Bring my torso back on, hit T to bring up the opacity, bring that down so I can actually see where my arm is, and let's take a look. Now this is very far forward already, so I'm actually pretty happy with where that key is at the moment. What we could do is maybe bring this a little bit back, and then in this phase, oops, not move the entire torso. Obviously because the torso is in the way, I'm not going to be able to click on it, so I'm just going to hold down shift and use my arrow keys. Let's drag that all the way back there. That should be fairly interesting. Why has this moved so far down? I'm just going to shift that back up again. There, and then I can copy that, and I can copy the first frame again, and then life is good. I'll bring the opacity of my torso back up to 100, I'll hide it, and then this way I can just see the path that this is taking, convert vertex tool, and let's add some curves to it. Okay, so I'll do that, and that, and this. Like so, and then this one of course down here and here and here and here, like so. Okay, and I could take a lot of time to try and line them up because neat paths are good paths, but for now that's looking pretty cool. Turn my torso back on. Let's take a look at that. That's looking a little bit better. I'm still not happy. Like my top arm I'm kind of happy with, but I'm not happy with how far I've moved this back arm. Alright, I really think that we could just have it coming out here. Not too intense. Okay. So if I play through that, that's looking cool. We got like a nice little swagger step going on. Alrighty, and then of course we can add easing. We're not going to jump into the graph editor today, but that sort of adds a little bit more of a pop to it, which is great. If I undo the easing, actually no, I do kind of like the easing, so I'm just gonna select them again, hit F9. We've got our easing at the moment. Okay, again we're losing a little bit of volume in terms of like the arc of the hand, so I could jump in here and add curves as necessary, but I'm really not going to sort of bore you guys with that. If you feel that you want to play around with the curves just so that your hand is following an actual arc and it's not just sort of bopping up and down, then by all means please do. I will notice the effort and it will be rewarded. Okay, so we've kind of got a walk going on at the moment, which is pretty nice. The next thing that we obviously want to focus on, if I unhide all of our shy layers, is the face, right? Because adding a little bit of animation to the face would help quite a lot. And currently it's not parented to the head, so it looks a little bit funny. Thankfully the face we don't have to do a puppet test on because we're not going to be animating it using the puppet pin. So I'm just going to parent it to the torso, and there we go. Alright, now there are a couple of things that we could do to adjust or sort of add a little bit of life to that face. And the first thing that we could do to do that is selecting it, hitting S to bring up our scale, and Shift P for position. And I'll make a dead keyframe for both, unlinking the scale on the face there. Alright, now this is a little bit of trial and error. There's no real set idea of it, but I think what I'm going to do is on the contact pose, let's take a look at this posing quickly. Contact, passing, contact. I think on the contact poses we kind of want, so I'm just going to make some dead frames over here, to introduce a little bit of a turn. Alright, and we can introduce a turn simply by adjusting the position. So what I'm going to do is select it, shift it slightly up. Alright. I'll bring the scale in a little bit, right? So just the horizontal, just the horizontal. We can then stretch it a little bit if we want. I don't necessarily think that we need squash and stretch to be taking place, but let's see if that helps. 95, 105, Just make sure that it doesn't obviously move off of the head. And I'm going to zoom in and just add a downward curve to that. Okay. Right, already that's looking a little bit cooler. Okay, so it's kind of like as this leg's moving forward, his head is turning slightly. And then as we hit our contact, it turns back again. And then I'm just going to repeat this. So now that leg hits and his head turns. No, but this would turn in the opposite direction. So I'm actually sorry. I'm gonna undo that, and let's drag it a little bit this way. So we kind of want the same amount, and we'll have like a nice little S curve going on over here. And we could, let's see, what did we do? 95, 105. So let's make this 95, stretch it down a little bit, and 105 to make it a little bit longer. Okay. It's looking fairly interesting, and then I can simply copy paste that and copy paste this. Just go back and make sure, okay, my curves are looking a little fucked up at the moment. So we're just gonna fix that like so. Alright, so if I play that back, just by adding a little bit of like character to the face, it's not necessarily making like physiological sense. Excuse the sniffles, I'm coming down with the sickness, but it's looking a lot sort of nicer. Alright, I don't like the squash that's happening. I don't think that we would be experiencing a squash in this case. So that's fine, but in this case, let's leave this on 100. 100 and 105 again. So if I take a look at that, yeah, okay, it's looking a little bit better. Okay, so that's looking fairly interesting. Now, again, I'm going to do a quick save, and then I'll make a new save, just in case something terrible happens, and I don't want to have to redo everything we've just done. Okay, so this video is already dragging on, but the last thing that we can do is just to break the little sort of hang that we're getting at the end, thanks to the easing, is we are going to introduce our code. Alright, our expression. And that is also going to allow us to offset our keys and make our lives easier. So, I am just going to select all my layers. I'm going to hit U to reveal every single keyframe. And this is where the magic really happens. So, holding down Alt or Option if you're a Mac user, we are then going to click on the little blue stopwatch over here. Alright, make sure you're holding the button down. If you're not, it's going to delete your keys. Okay, but if you do it correctly, we click, our numbers turn red, and we get a line of code here. Alright, and we are going to replace this with loop, lowercase l o o p, capital O U T, right, loop out, open your bracket, quotation marks. Okay, you might not be able to see it, but these are the two strokes, right, not the single stroke. We're going to say cycle, C-Y-C-L-E, close quotation marks, close our circle, and then semicolon on the end. Alright, and that's our little code. Now remember, we discussed the direction of this code. So I'm just going to quickly click on it, Control C to copy it, and I'm going to Alt click on all of my little stopwatches. And I'm just going to paste this code in it for now. Alright, now, as we discussed in class, right, it does matter which direction we shift our keys if we're going to offset things. It does matter what our code says. Okay, loop out will only work if our keys are either in the workspace or if we shift them to the left. Alright, towards this dead space that we've left before 1 second. Loop in, so we replace out with in, capital I, lowercase n, will be used if we shift the keys to the right of the timeline. Okay. But thankfully, that's fairly easy to remember, right? It might seem complicated, but if you really stop and put your pretty little heads to the task, you'll realize that if you shift your keys and they're hanging in mid-air and no animation is being looped, all you have to do is swap the out for in or vice versa. So if I play this, we've got a lovely little cycle. Okay, now what I might want to try and do is see what happens if I shifted the position of my arm keys, holding down shift to select those as well. If I shifted these up a little bit. Right, did that change much? Not really. I guess I'd really need to push it. So at the moment it's starting there. So what happens if I were to start it there? He's looking a little bit more chill at the moment. Still kind of hucking fuss at the moment, but I guess it's not that noticeable. If I shift my keys up to the point where the arms are sort of at the same time as the legs, we could change the idea of what our character is, and that really just helps with that. But of course, if I were to select my arm keys, okay, selected too many there, so my arm and my arm, and I shifted them forwards. Notice how there's no animation, right? This is when I would change loop out to loop in. Okay, so I'm fairly certain this covers the entirety of the walk cycle animation. Okay, so I'm just going to hit Control or Command A to select all my layers, hit U to collapse them, and I can lock them now because I don't want to accidentally break them. Okay. I could do a couple of more things, obviously, to make this a little bit better. Right now, we've got a character wandering endlessly through the void, and that's a great existential sort of commentary on life and capitalism, but it's not necessarily going to make for great viewing. Alright, so our character is quite large at the moment. I could right-click, New, create a null object, and I could parent the torso to that null object, scale down the null object to make him a little bit smaller, and reposition him. Alright, if you guys and I can delete that null, so now he's like a little bit smaller. If you really wanted to make a background, I would more than enjoy a background, but obviously it would need to loop nicely so that we could play the entire loop animation without any issues. Okay, but alternatively we could simply just go layer, new, solid, right? Shortcut is Command or Control Y. This brings up our solid options. At the moment I've got this lovely dark royal blue selected. I'm going to say OK. It hides everything because of the layer hierarchy. I'm just going to drag that to the bottom. Alright, it's a little bit too dark, especially because of the color scheme of our character. So I'm going to hit Command or Control Shift Y. That brings back the solid settings. I'm just going to lighten it a little bit. You'll see that that automatically changes the background. That's looking pretty dope. We'll say OK. Then I'm going to duplicate this. Control Shift or Command Shift Y will make this one a lot darker. Say new. And we're just going to then drag that down so that it makes a floor. Alright, and immediately that adds a lot of character. Alright, so now our dude's not just walking through space, but he's in a weird blue room, which is obviously just as bad, but it's not as bad as sort of looking at black empty void. Alright, so that has been that for our walk cycle animation. I really hope that this helps you guys figure out what you want to do with your characters. I really look forward to seeing you bring your characters to life. Once you've practiced following this tutorial, please apply it to your characters at home, and from there we can make our contact sessions when you get stuck. But I'm sure you're sick of my voice, I'm sick of my voice, so until next time, I'll see you dudes in class. Bye.